Hello there, Last Chance Rotary. I've been getting I haven't put a video up in a while. I've been getting a lot of requests to do an overview of blue. So I thought I'd have a special episode today and do the best I can to, one, go over a little bit of history of blue and how blue came to be in my possession, and maybe just a little bit of history of how I've become infatuated with rotary engines and rotary engine sports cars over the years. Additionally, I'm going to do my best to cover a brief overview of all the repairs that have been done on blue, and it's many, and I'm going to probably miss some. So I'll start out with a little bit of history. Everybody knows my background. You know, my dad was in the Air Force, and at one point we were stationed overseas. So I did my sophomore to senior year of high school in Germany. What a great experience that was. And during that time, had a close friend of mine whose father had a white first generation Rx-7, and we spent a lot of time driving that car really anywhere and everywhere we could. Germany, France, Luxembourg, anywhere we could go. So being a bunch of high school kids, running that car around was pretty fabulous, on the Autobahn, all that. At one point we actually accidentally cooked the engine pretty good in that Rotary. Knowing what I know now, I believe we didn't care for that car properly, being a bunch of high school kids. Ended up starving of oil, and you know, perhaps an oil metering line broke, and nonetheless I believe it destroyed the apex seals in that car. But my friend's dad was a pretty good sport about it. I don't know if he'll ever watch this or not, but he ended up getting a second generation Rx-7, and I remember vividly going to the junkyard and finding another Rotary, and we put it right back in the white car and continued to drive it. So those memories kind of resonated with me. As I moved on in life, I joined the military, served some time in the Marine Corps, and kind of forgot about rotary engines and all that experience. And you know, I was pretty busy at that time, as you can imagine. And when I got out, I started to kind of get my civilian life, my civilian career moving forward, and moved here to Pennsylvania. And started working for a very good company in Altoona. And one day I was out at lunch, and I look over at a used car dealership, and it was like a unicorn. Another white Rx-7, only this one was a 1984 GSL-SE with a 13B fuel injection. The dealer actually let me drive the car home and overnight, and that was all it took. Next day I came back, had to have this car, and I told him, save it for me, this is like a Saturday, and I'll be back Monday with the money for the car. Came back Monday, and somebody was waiting for me Saturday when I brought the car back, and bought the car out from underneath me. So I was not able to procure that car. That car, the white one that I just mentioned, is in the hands of a new owner who I keep in regular contact with, and try to provide guidance for his adventures doing some repairs on that. So that's kind of interesting. Nonetheless, I had the bug. I had to have one. All the memories from Germany and driving on the Autobahn and doing all those things started coming back, and so I started to scour the internet, and in one of my more foolish purchases, I found blue on eBay by a seller in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I bought the car off of eBay for a relatively good price, so I thought. Paid to have the car shipped on a truck from Las Vegas, Nevada to Pennsylvania. And let's just say when I got blue off the truck, it was a little bit difficult conversation with my wife, and it was a little upsetting seeing the condition that blue was in. At that time, the body work on blue was just completely rock chips, paint chips, a little bit of rust. There was a whale tail on the back of Blue. It was attached with deck screws, just drilled right down through. The car had really been abused. And you know, being inexperienced on the mechanical end of it, I actually had no idea what I was getting myself into. But nonetheless, I purchased the car. I believe that purchase happened in September of 2005, just after my daughter was born. And I've had the car ever since. It's now June 2020, almost 15 years, coming up on 15 years I've had Blue. So, you know, I was able to find a guy a little bit at a time, you know, maybe a year or two into it, and they did a fabulous job. I got to give credit to my brother-in-law who participated in that, and we repainted the car the original color and got it sorted out. It's not perfect. There's some blemishes on this. If you get close, I know where they are, but it's held up pretty well over 15 years. So that was, you know, first order of business. We got a paint job done on the car, gave it some attention. For a while I was running some aftermarket performance rims and wheels, lower profile, and they were nice, but as I've moved along in the evolution of this car, I've really desired to get it close to original. Not totally, but close. For example, you can notice here I didn't put the black guards or the protectors down the body. I just thought the car looked really slick and smooth without that on there. So, you know, that's one little thing. Didn't stay original. Done some modifications to the engine. Nothing significant. So, as I mentioned that, and as you watch Last Chance Rotary, you know, I'm not the guy that goes and Bridgeports out these engines, turbos them up, mega squirt ECUs and all that. That stuff's great, and you know, you guys that can do that are way more talented than I am. But that's just not something I wanted to do, or I kind of feel I have the ability to do. You know, I've spent all my effort and energy to try to maintain the car as it is well. But we have done some small modifications, or some larger than others. Probably the biggest one I've done on this is the Racing Beat header and exhaust upgrade. That was a big upgrade for this car. I encourage you to watch that video if you've not seen it already. I tried my best to detail that. So yeah, that's a little bit of the history of Blue and how it came to be. Had the car for, again, about 15 years, and we've had our ups and downs. And I think when you go through a little bit of history like that with a car, it becomes part of you a little bit, and you become part of the car. And so at any rate, I had the car for several years, and in around 2012 time frame, you know, I kind of kept it running as best I could, but to be honest, I didn't understand really what it took to maintain the rotary engine, to maintain this car. And as time was going on, I was seeing more and more repair items needing to be done, and I started to get a little bit you know, kind of down in the dumps that I knew the time was going to come. I either needed to figure out a way to get this car fixed, find somebody that can work on the car, or get rid of the car. And at one point I was pretty much made up my mind, I'm going to sell the car to somebody that knows how to care for the rotary. And right around that time I had a brief move out to Ohio. And I stored the car for about a year and a half here in Pennsylvania. I didn't even take it with me. When I came back, first thing I went to storage to get it out, and there was a very large puddle of oil underneath of it, so I didn't even try to start the car. Someone who had been caring for the car snapped the key off in the ignition by accident, so I had a piece of key stuck in the ignition. And just overall looking at the car, it really was in bad shape, and I was kind of down in the dumps. So I had it trailered over to my new residence here, and put it in the garage, and I contacted an old friend that I met at a car show years ago. And I really got to give you know, he's a good friend of mine, which maybe at some point, if he lets me, I'll have a special edition of Last Chance Rotary on just this individual, because he's a very unique person. and kind of took me under his wings, and one by one. So the first thing was address the oil leak. And what it was is the oil cooler lines, the oil cooler itself, where the line attaches, had a crack. It's quite common in the oil cooler for the SE model, by the way. I'll try to get a close-up of that if I can. And we immediately started the repairs of that. And what was great is I did the repairs, and he supervised. And you know, I haven't really had that where somebody allowed me to fumble through, make the mistakes on my own, go slow. And we did it. We put Racing Beat stainless steel oil cooler lines on, put a brand new oil cooler in, and it's been great since. And you know, that just started a chain of events of all the repairs in this car. And to be candid, I had no idea what this car really needed until just one by one we started to go through it. Now the good news is, through that exercise, I've become quite knowledgeable on this car, and that's why I'm shooting these videos now, because I'm hoping this will be a benefit to somebody down the road. Maybe you enjoy just watching these sort of things, and I'd also like to get some feedback. I'm sure there's plenty out there I still don't know. So this is a good opportunity to put something fun out there on YouTube. I don't think this content really in this nature is out there, or else I'd have probably been all over it back when the car needed repaired. And so yeah, so we'll carry on here, and I think maybe I'll start with the engine overview, and we'll look at that here directly. Okay, back again, YouTube. So what we're looking at here is Blue's engine bay, which you've seen before if you've watched any of the video series on when I burped the radiator, for example, which, by the way, is working fabulously. That repair actually worked well. I have heat back, no more gurgling noises behind the dash. Coolant level is great. So I'm actually pleased I was able to do that. First time I ever successfully burped a radiator. So that was, one repair right there. And so kind of some other things. You can see I put a new battery in Blue. This is one of the Optima batteries, highly recommended. They are expensive, but they're good batteries. Just some little things. Battery quick disconnect. My friend, he encouraged me, first order of business, get the factory quick disconnect on the battery on the ground. And that was the best advice anybody could ever give, because I am constantly disconnecting the ground. I can't imagine breaking out a screwdriver every time I need to do that. Not to mention winter storage, it's nice to disconnect that, save the battery a little bit. So man, you start getting into these cars, man, first thing you do, put a quick disconnect on the battery. It'll just save you so much time and hassle. Other things going on here. You can see here I have, yellow and red dots. And basically, what that is leading and trailing ignition coil markings. So if you go here, for example, and follow the spark plug line, if you go from the yellow coil and follow that along, you can see here I have a yellow mark right there on top of the distributor cap. There's the red mark. That yellow is for one of the trailing plugs. The red one there for one of the leading plugs. Little things like that to make a roadside repair easier, more visual. Several things are marked. We've added some markings along the way. All these little things just help you. You can see here, added a oil pressure gauge. Why would I put an oil pressure gauge in the engine? Well, always paranoid about enough oil and the oil pressure situation in Blue. In another episode, I'm going to review the dash in Blue and the gauges. And the oil pressure gauge in this is just a little flaky. It doesn't quite want to always come up to pressure right away. So this is a secondary mechanical verification. It runs to, if you can see it down here, the Racing Beat, looking for it. You can see this blue metal plate here. That is a racing bead adapter to where you can plug a mechanical oil pressure gauge into right below the oil filter. So, you know, if the gauge on the dash doesn't come up and I want to be sure, I just come out real quick, check here. Yep, I got oil pressure. I'm good. Not to mention, something happens. I'm troubleshooting the car. Okay, I can't be in the car to look at that kind of status. No problem. I can come out here and I can see status right here. Next thing, fuel pressure gauge. Why would I put a fuel pressure gauge in the engine? Well, if you ever have trouble starting the car, it's either going to be fuel or it's going to be ignition, 9 times out of 10. Well, this is a quick way. I can quickly look here and go, wow, do I have oil pressure? Little things like that. Little pads hanging here. What's that for? Well, that's to if I want to check the oil roadside and I don't happen to have a rag on me, I can quickly wipe it off on here. You know, just little things. Yeah, so some repairs that have been done. Did the slave, the clutch cylinder in this at one point. Have bled the brakes. Haven't replaced the brake master cylinder, but have bled them. Changed the oil down in the steering column box. I highly encourage anybody to do that. That's an important thing to maintain, and it helps with turning of the wheel, especially if you don't have power steering and things like that. And you know, as some of you've seen the other video, the double pulley setup, which resolved the belts jumping all over after removal of the air pump from the racing beat header and exhaust install. So those are just some things we've done under the engine. That certainly doesn't tell it all. You know, a lot of just trying to learn and understand everything that's going on with a 13B fuel injected car. There's a lot to this. Vacuum lines, always hovering over the vacuum lines. You know, making sure that those are in order. Gauges. My gauges hadn't worked. I replaced the oil sending unit. It's a brand new one, even though the gauge is still flaky inside the car. It's another LCR video. The low coolant sensor on top of the radiator. Replaced that. Things of that nature. So a lot of little things over the engine bay. Real quick, I'll go to the other side. Going around the other side, something I'm still fooling around with, the charcoal canister. I still have a fuel pressure issue on the fuel tank, but if you saw in an earlier video, I have been able to resolve the leak, at least for the time being, and I'm relieving the pressure an alternate way, but it's not ideal. So at some point I really got to get into this and determine what's going on. Is it the canister? Is it the line? What is in fact going on? Replaced a new air filter, cleaned out the air box, replaced the air filter, and you can see there's a lot of room down in this area that didn't used to be there. You know, there used to be an air pump there that was removed during the racing beat header and exhaust install. Performed a minor repair on the oil metering pump lines. You can see there. At some point, that's going to get replaced with brand new lines. Throttle position sensor. So I've had to adjust the throttle position sensor a couple of times with idle issues. I'll do a video on that and how to accomplish that activity. So all in all, as abused as this car's been, it has stood the test of time. You know, one thing I want to talk about is, you know, rotary engine reliability. And a lot of people knock these cars. I keep hearing, oh, 80,000 miles on the money, you got to go do a rebuild. Let me tell you, I think that's a myth. These engines are extremely reliable, but they're not for the average consumer that just hops in the car, never checks their oil, and just rips and goes. A lot of these engines are abused or ran really hard. You know, people are, you know, and again, nothing, no disrespect, nothing against it, but people are turboing them up. They're bridge porting them. They're really maxing them out. Well, all that stuff we do, all those mods do, there's a cost to pay, and that's, you know, they do wear the engines out. But this engine has been rebuilt some point in its life before my ownership of it, so at least since I've owned it, it's lasted 15 years. I know of another rotary engine that has lasted almost exactly 44 years and has been driven, not babied, driven hard. But the owner knows how to take care of the car, knows about maintaining the oil levels and the coolant levels and how important all that is. You take care of this rotary engine, it's gonna last you. Okay, so moving along, I can already tell I'm glossing over a lot of things in this car. I'm going to try to hit the high points. Starting with the front. New shocks in the front, as well as brakes, rotors. Again, all performed myself. Never knew how to do any of those type of repairs. Done that. Pulled the entire front steering rack out. Replaced with new control arms, new bushings, placed it back in the car, and did a self alignment using strings and a jack stand. And I gotta say, I never did an alignment on a car before. This car is very simple to do it on, and I didn't take it to an alignment shop. Let me tell you, this alignment is pretty darn close. It runs great, runs straight, no issues. I never bothered to take it to an alignment shop. It's good to go. Maybe at some point I'll do a video on how that was performed. You know, oil. You know, I run an oil called Brad Penn. It's Pennsylvania green oil. Highly recommend it. It's got zinc in the oil, and this runs a 20 weight 50. If you look in your owner's manual, it'll give you guidelines for you know, the climate you live in, the area you're at, what oil to run in this car. I'll do an LCR video on just Brad Penn oil. It's a great oil. I've been up to the Refinery Museum in Bradford, and yeah, that's a fun drive as it is, and I also take a lot of pride that we're putting you know, American-made, Pennsylvania-made oil in the car, and Blue just loves it. So really good oil. Yeah, so that's kind of pretty much the front of the car. New radiator. You saw in my video of burping the radiator. If you recall, I dropped the car on the radiator, so this is now a new replica copper radiator in the car. So yeah, so went through again. We've gone some ups and downs as we moved along. Power mirrors. I'm actually fooling with this right now, and when I get the repair completed, I'll shoot a video. But the power mirrors are, that side, the passenger side works great, but this one doesn't want to go up and down, only up left to right. Working on that, getting fixed, but it's serviceable right now. Door locks. You saw my my video. You know, I think I mentioned one of the other videos in the door lock. I'm going to shoot a special video on how you can key these door locks to match the key you have. This one's been redone by myself, and I can now unlock the driver's side door. I have to do the passenger side yet. Sunroof. If you guys paid close attention to other videos, I had the solid paint matching moonroof on the car, so I also own that. And you know, again, I found one and I took it to have it professionally painted, and it matches the car wonderfully. But today I decided to switch it out and go with the, I believe this is what came factory with this color, was the clear sunroof, so I decided to switch out. So I have both roofs and bags for both of them, and so that's kind of fun to swap them in and out. I haven't had this one in the car for a long time, so today, for a couple different reasons, I'm going to run with this when we go on our drive. Moving along, just little things, reflector, this was cracked, replaced that. Yeah, so we'll go around back here in a second, we'll look at that. So here we are at the back of the car. there is something a little different here with the badging, and I won't reveal that because I think it'd be fun if somebody else spots what's going on. But basically, we put the badging back on the car, and those are the correct badges for this car. But I'll let somebody else point out what I'm getting at there. Lights. I've never been a fan of these back brake lights. They're not very bright. They're low to the ground. I'm always afraid somebody's going to cut rear end me. But there's a video coming. I'm hoping we can do an LCD or LED upgrade to these and make them a lot more visual. I got a video coming on that, but I'm not done with that repair just yet. So we'll get there. Windshield wiper. Rear windshield wiper didn't work. Pulled the motor out. Had a bad motor. Put it in. Still wasn't working the best. This rod here provides a connection for this motor. So if the window is not closed all the way, close enough for that to make a connection, this rear wiper blade will not work. And I've got it working again, but it is still a little finicky. So there's still a little more work to do on this. I don't think it's quite making a good connection here. So we got to do that. There's going to be a mod to this right here coming up. I'll save that for a special episode of Last Chance Rotary. But this is a little irritating getting your fingers in here to unlock the hatch. So again, there's going to be a little modification to that coming along. Again, tasteful modifications. We want to keep the car as original as possible, but some little improvements along the way. The power antenna, repaired the power antenna. You know, for the stereo. Is it a big deal? No, but you know, we fixed it. Okay, I'll move on to a little bit of the inside next, and one other thing I forgot to mention. Okay, another thing that happened in Blue's life, and this was rather catastrophic. I had some noises coming out of the rear end of the car for a long period of time. Had it up in the air on jack stands, turning the wheels. Couldn't figure out what it was. I ended up pulling the limited slip differential and putting a replacement limited slip differential in the car. Put the drive shaft back on. It still seemed like it was vibrating, just could not get it sorted out. And one day I was driving it and I pulled out of a parking lot, and something really unexpected happened. And again, this is one of those times that me in this car. But if you look really close, you'll see this rear control arm right here. Well, these are brand new. Well, why are they brand new? Well, when I pulled out of that parking lot that day, both of those control arms, both sides, snapped in half. They're really just tubes. They're not solid at all. Snapped in half, and if you can envision it, the camber or the rear axle in its entirety shot backwards, pulled the drive shaft out of the transmission, locked the car up immediately. I was only doing about tops 25 miles an hour pulling out of that parking lot, and it made this car slide about, oh, I don't know, 20-30 yards, and it left a black trail right down the street, and that was it. Gear oil everywhere, drive shaft laid on the ground, had to call a flatbed. Not good, not good at all. So why did that happen? Well, like I said, don't know for sure, but this car's been abused, and people don't take care of these cars. So, you know, was somebody trying to drift with this thing, or running it really hard at a track, running it on dirt roads? Who knows? I mean, just beating the car to death. I suspect, you know, was it jacked? You know, did it get stuck on something? I suspect from the day I bought the car, those tubes were compromised, and never knew it until something bad happened. Had I been going up the highway, that would have been a fatality, for sure. That would have been it. So Blue fortunately alerted me to it in an embarrassing fashion, but we recovered. Put new arms back on. got the drive shaft unstuck. It was really jammed between the transmission and the back. I actually had to take that one to a mechanic. Couldn't handle that myself. They got it freed up, got it properly balanced, put it back in the car, and it's been great ever since. Also, you know, I'd like to shoot a whole video on just replacing that limited slip differential. That's a good video. And also, I've kind of devised a way to easily fill up the gear oil, fill up the gear oil in the rear differential, make life a little bit easier. Using a funnel, a tube, and a ladder, of all things. So you might get a kick out of that video, but I have a kind of a slick way to do that, makes life easier. The rear axles, you know, started to get some bearing noise. There's actually two axle rods that go in. You take the brakes, the rotors off, and it's a press fit, believe it or not. They pull right out. And you got to take it to a shop, or if you have one, you know, get it on a press. You know, press that old bearing off, press a new one on. That has been done on both sides of this car. So you know, it's got new rear axle bearings, new front wheel bearings as well. That was one of the first repairs performed. So again, there isn't too much on this car that hasn't been messed with. So real quick on the inside, new gauge cluster. So that's an interesting video in itself. It's actually strange because the mileage now is not accurate. I've had to make manual notes on where the mileage was on the original gauge cluster and what it is on the new one in case I ever have to go back and verify that mileage. But pulling this gauge cluster in itself was an activity. As you saw in my other video, got the fuel sending unit repaired, so now the fuel gauge works. Actually, all the gauges work. Just that oil pressure gauge there in the top right, it's finicky. You know, sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. I've got more work to do on that. You might ask, where's the old gauge cluster? Well, that gauge cluster is currently with a pretty talented electrical engineer, and he's doing an experiment on that gauge cluster, which I'll reveal in a future thing. And he may be making a pretty neat device to help diagnose the gauge cluster, but we'll see how that turns out. Just in general, going over, you know, all the little plastic panels. I pulled a lot of that stuff out of the parts car. You know, switches. You know, some of these buttons here. What is this button? What is this? So there's some little tasteful modifications we've done. They have a purpose. You know, which, you know, I'll reveal some of that I will not. You know, moving along here, cruise control. It's probably the biggie. Can't seem to get the cruise control working. I've worked on it, but I don't have the special tool to diagnose the cruise control, because it could be the sending unit, it could be the ECU, it could be the switch, it could be the cruise control canister, which is currently removed from the car. So not sure what's going on there. The steering column, got a very nice immaculate steering column here. These plastic pieces tend to snap and break tall people tend to bang on with their knees and stuff, you know, and have issues. Steering wheel, I've had that on and off several times doing work. The gauge, the controls on the clusters. One point, my lights, I put my high beam on, all the lights go out. It's this switch. These go bad. You got to replace them. So I was able to pull this one, replace it. Someday this one will go bad. So that's something we'll have to contend with in the future. Moving along. You know, I had a CD deck in this, I had gauges here, and then at the end of the day, I decided to go back to what the car originally was, this big swanking 80s stereo. I put it back in the car. It was actually quite a bit of effort to figure out the wiring, there's two amplifiers back behind the seats that drive this thing. There's a switch here that controls the balance of the speakers, quite unusual. This thing is rather complex. If everything's been manipulated with, which this car has. It was all hacked out and cut up, and so it took a lot, you know, especially for somebody not as skilled in electronics, to figure out. But this thing's working pretty good now. You know, at the end of the day, honestly, I don't listen to it that much. I'd rather just hear the engine going. But it's fun that the original stereo is back in the car, and this is exactly how it would look coming out of the factory. I even bothered to put the quartz clock back in. The Logicon. So the GSL-SE has these push button Logicons. Couldn't seem to get that working. I actually have the special Logicon checker to check these. So I was able to get 2 or 3 of these, pull bulbs and different things off and make one good one, verify it on the Logicon checker, and reinstall it. Now everything works good. Air conditioning. We've recharged the air conditioning, got it working. Everybody tells you, if you take it to a shop and anybody tells you the AC in these cars is too old, no longer good, that's just bumpkiss. 9 times out of 10, it just needs a good recharge, and it'll last for a while. Now this one probably is leaking somewhere. I usually have to recharge it, you know, once a year, but big deal. It's once a year, and then, you know, it runs again. So here's a very important upgrade. Cup holder. Gotta have a cup holder. I mean, it is a pain in the butt in this car. It's my one complaint. You don't have a place to put a drink or nothing if you're going for a ride. What's nice about this is it's just sandwiched in between the dash and the seat. I can pull it right out. It's not screwed to anything. Works great. My phone and my wallet can fit right there. No problem. The door panels. All the little pieces of the door panels. Especially this guy right here. Very difficult to find a first-gen Rx-7 where this cup isn't cracked. I have 2. They're in there. They're in great shape. The door panels. I have spare matching door panels in the garage off of the parts car. So, you know, again, all these little things. I've been into the ECU under the front. There's going to be a special episode on just the ECU. There's things I bet you don't know about the ECU, and we need to cover that. In the back of the car, it isn't perfect, but all the panels, all the carpet has been replaced out of the parts car in much better condition. Still some faded marks, but all in all, very good condition. I carry a full-size spare in the back. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's foam padding all around the full-size spare to level the back out, so you'd never even know. But man, how nice is it to have a full-size spare in the car if you have a flat, which I have in this car. Okay, pretty soon I'll be getting ready to do a drive. Okay, so before we start our drive, I thought I would show you. Again, these are just interesting little things I'm not sure everybody brings up. This is the Mazda Rx-7 owner's manual. And some of you might be thinking, oh, big deal, it's an owner's manual. Well, you know, here's a question I'll ask you viewers. Do you know how to properly start your Rx-7 GSL-SE? Now you might be thinking to yourself, come on, Mike, how stupid can you get? You just turn the key. Well, not exactly. There is a starting procedure, and it matters in the performance of this car. So if you turn to page 3-4, it has the starting procedure for starting the engine on vehicles with EGI, electronic gas injection, or fuel injection system. Fasten your seatbelt. Make sure. Goes down through the steps. The biggie. When the engine is cold, depress the accelerator pedal once to the floor and release. Then turn the ignition key on and start the car. When you do this, you can hear a click under the engine, and I believe that is the airflow meter and possibly the TPS sensor positioning in the correct position, that the ECU knows that this is a cold engine and what procedures to take to warm the engine up. And what happens is, after you start the car, you'll see the RPM should come up to 2,000, 2,500 RPMs, and the rotary engine will idle very high. And then as the car warms up, as the rotary warms up, that needle will start to gradually come back down to you reach operating idle and operating temperature. So this is an important part of the procedure. Now conversely, when the engine's warm, you just turn the ignition key to on. So again, little tips. Read your owner's manual. Very important. Okay, we'll get ready to get started here. Okay, so, that's a brief overview. I have not touched on all the repairs that have been done on this car, and it's still ongoing. But that's the enjoyment. When you can own something and maintain it and take care of it, and get your hands around it, that's part of the enjoyment of having it. And we're going to go for a drive here, and maybe I'll talk about why Rotary. Why not a big Corvette or Mustang with 500-600 horsepower? It's all great, more power to you. But there's something unique and interesting about driving a rotary engine car, and the uniqueness of it is a big one with me, and yeah, can actually maintain it. And like I said before, I was on the verge of selling the car, and luckily a good friend came along and bailed me out and took me under his wing, and now I can honestly say I'm pretty knowledgeable in these first generation Rx-7s and rotary engines in general, and I can happily say I can maintain this car myself and know what it takes. And I've gotten to the point where now people are hitting me up for guidance and advice. So yeah, a lot of good times, and here in a minute we're going to go what's called the we're going to go on a drive, and I'll explain to you my little process for doing that. All right, thank you.